this video, we are going to talk about what I think is the surprising enemy of good songwriting that not enough people talk about. So I think the surprising enemy of good songwriting is simply impatience. Now, there's many forms that this impatience can take. You may be at the beginning of your songwriting journey and you want to be writing advanced music and be using borrowed chords, but really, you're probably not ready for that yet. So be patient, allow yourself to just start with some basic chord progressions, maybe even use stock chord progressions, which I am definitely not a fan of generally, but if you're at the beginning of the songwriting process, it's okay to be patient with yourself and allow yourself to write from where you're at. A phrase I really like about this is crawl, walk, run. And the idea is that you need to learn to crawl before you can hope to walk, and then you need to learn to walk before you could ever hope to run. Try as a challenge to really just limit yourself to learning one new thing about songwriting before you go back and actually apply what you learned to your next song, and only learn the one thing. Don't try to learn 50 million things all at the same time and force yourself to try to remember all of it as you songwrite. Just try to get 1% better with every song you write. So impatience is the surprising enemy of good songwriting, partially because you need to be patient with yourself and understand that you're not going to run right away with songwriting. Your first songs are probably going to be fairly simple, and your first songs are almost certainly not going to be your best songs. As you learn more about songwriting, whether that be about poetry writing or lyric writing, or whether that be about music theory and music composition, you're going to get better and better over time. Allow yourself to just write things that are more simple, but make sure that you are constantly learning as you write more and more songs so that you're a better songwriter 2 years from now than you are today, and a much better songwriter 5 or 10 years from now than you are today as well. But the main reason I think impatience is the surprising enemy of good songwriting is because, to me, the main difference between a novice songwriter and a more experienced good songwriter is that a novice songwriter will write or improvise until they find something that works, and a more experienced songwriter will wait until they have something that's good rather than something that simply works. Now, there are many layers to this impatience, so let's just break down a few of them. One example of this impatience could look like deciding to write a song off of a pretty questionable foundation. If we are going to take the time to write a whole song, we should make sure that we are writing the song off of a pretty inspiring, pretty interesting foundation. Now, this is why I often speak against starting with a chord progression, or more specifically, starting with a stock overused chord progression. Because while there's nothing inherently wrong with stock chord progressions, if you just start with a basic chord progression that's been used a million times and then tell yourself, now I have to come up with an awesome song off of this, and it's going to be way harder to take a stock chord progression and eventually make it interesting than it will be to take an already interesting bass line or an already interesting song title or melody and then turn that into an awesome song. So instead of running with every single songwriting idea you have, whether on the lyrical side or on the musical side, I'd recommend treating all your ideas as if they are cheap and low value. Now, I don't mean to insult yourself and say, oh, my ideas are trash, but just understand that not every idea is worth writing a song about. Try coming up with at least 10 ideas for every one idea that you take the time to develop into a song. Think of it this way: if every single author just wrote a book every time they came up with an idea, they might write more books, but most of their books would probably be super uninteresting because they usually try to figure out what's a great idea or foundation for this book. What's a really cool science fiction world, or really interesting fantasy world, or a really interesting character that I can build my book off of. And we should try to do the same thing, because not every song idea is worthy of being turned into a song. Treat our ideas as if they are cheap. Always have a huge list of all your ideas, and don't treat it like, oh, I came up with an idea, I have to write a song now. Instead, be more discerning about what idea is actually worthy of taking all the time it takes to develop it into a good song. So not only do I think it's super important that we are patient with our idea gathering process, but I also think it's really important to show the patience to actually edit our song. Now, talking about what editing a song looks like is a pretty big question, so let's just break down a few examples. Let's say you started your song with a chord progression that you think is really interesting, and now you're trying to figure out what is a good melody to go on top of that chord progression. A lot of times what people will do is they will just improvise with their voice until they find a melody that works. But really, we shouldn't just say, oh, this melody works, it's okay, let's just go with it. Instead, there are really two different things that we can do to sort of edit edit that melody into something better. The first thing we can do is try to one-up the melody we came up with. So you have this melody that does work with the chord progression you have, write a totally different melody that also works with that chord progression and see which one is better. Think of this like the eye test at the eye doctor, where they say, what's better, number 1 or number 2? And then you say, number 2's better. And they're like, okay, what's better, number 2 or number 3? And do the same thing with your melody. So next time you come up with a melody that works for your song, don't just stop there. Instead, try to one-up that melody. Write more melodies and see if you like those better. So you have a melody, try writing a second melody, and then ask yourself, which one do I like better? Do you like melody 2 better? Awesome. Now write a third melody, and then compare that third melody to the second melody and see which one is better. Let's say this time you like the second melody better again, and now you write a fourth melody. And now it's 4 versus 2, and 4 is even better than 2. So now you've written 4 different melodies and you have the best of the 4. And then the other way to edit is to actually edit, which would be to take the melody you have and then just try changing one little thing at a time. Maybe change the rhythm up a little bit, change one note within the melody, move it up a little more, move it down a little more, add a leap when there wasn't a leap in the melody before. You could also just straight up remove a note or add an extra note. There are so many different ways that we can just edit our melody one step at a time. And this is going to be extra powerful if you actually combine these two. So you improvise a melody until you come up with something that you think, okay, this is pretty good, or this works, and then you try to one-up that melody. At least write 2, 3, or 4 more melodies and see which one is the best. Then take that melody and try to edit that melody. Change one note at a time, try changing the rhythm up a little bit, and see if you can make that melody even better. And this isn't just an important step in melody writing. In fact, I think we should do something like this for almost everything that we write, at least for the main parts of the song. So if your song starts with a guitar hook, try doing this with the guitar hook. Just try editing one note at a time, changing it up a little bit, maybe come up with different versions of it and see if you can one-up what you already came up with, and then move on. Don't just say, oh, this guitar hook is cool, I'm just gonna move on. An easy way to remember this is with the simple phrase, writing is editing. And really, writing is editing is just shorthand for the idea that the vast majority of the quality of an end product is created in the editing process, not in the writing process. Or put another way, don't overemphasize your first draft. Just get your first draft over with, and then understand that most of the final quality of the song you're writing or anything else you're writing is not based on the inspiration you felt in that moment, but instead is going to be created in the editing process. You'll notice that all your favorite authors don't just do NaNoWriMo every month and just put out a book every month saying, oh, that's my first draft, it's done, because you wouldn't like their books if they did that, because their books would be a giant mess. Instead, they put out something like 1 book a year, and maybe it takes them a month or 2 months to actually write the book, but the editing process is where they take that pretty rough book and turn it into the final product that you end up buying and loving to read, and that's going to be the book that inspires you to buy another book from them. The same thing is going to be true for people who write screenplays, people who write essays. Basically, every type of writer understands that most of the final quality of writing is going to come in the editing process. And for songwriting, it really is no different. So if even after this video you find yourself still struggling with impatience, something you can do is check out my free guide on the 10 different ways to start writing a song. If you're impatient about just getting into songwriting, be sure to check that out. It will give you 10 different ways to start writing a song so that you can start writing right away. Thanks for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.